Hey there. Tonight, we're stepping into a different kind of story. Not the bright halls of Olympus, but the shadowed crossroads where three paths meet. Not the blazing light of day, but the soft glow of twin torches held by a goddess who walks between worlds. You won't find simple heroes here, or straightforward tales of glory. Just the ancient, layered story of a goddess who predates the gods you know, who holds keys to doors most mortals never see, and who guards the threshold between what is and what might be. If these calm tales from the ancient world help you drift into dreams, you can like and subscribe, but only if they truly bring you peace. And if you'd like to help our channel grow, your support means more than you imagine. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from, the time on your clock, and if you still have a little sleepy energy remaining, send it our way. It's oddly comforting to know who else is drifting off to the same ancient mysteries through history. So, dim the lights. Let the shadows lengthen in your room. Imagine torchlight flickering at the corner of your vision, and settle in. Let's begin with the goddess they called Hecate, the one who stands at every crossroads, watching all paths at once, holding the keys to mysteries older than memory. The goddess of shadows. There are goddesses of daylight and open skies. There are goddesses of hearth fires and harvest fields, of love proclaimed in sunlight and battles won in the glare of noon. And then there is Hecate. She is not of the day. She is of the threshold, the in-between, the moment when the sun has set, but darkness has not yet fully claimed the world. She is the goddess you meet at the crossroads, when you must choose between three paths, none of them clear, all of them leading somewhere you cannot quite see. Her name is ancient, older than many of the gods who would later claim Olympus as their home. Some say it means she who works her will from afar. Others claim it derives from the far-reaching one, linking her to distances both physical and metaphysical, to the spaces beyond mortal sight. But etymology fails to capture what she truly is. Words fumble in the presence of a goddess who operates at the edges of language itself, in the spaces between definitions. In the pantheon of Greek deities, Hecate occupies a peculiar position. She is not an Olympian, yet Zeus honored her above many who were. She is not entirely of the underworld, yet she moves through it with the ease of one who belongs. She is not solely a goddess of witchcraft, though that association would come to define her in later ages. She is something more ancient, more elusive. She is liminal, a word that comes from the Latin for threshold. She exists at boundaries, at the edges where one thing becomes another. Think of her standing at the place where three roads meet. Such places were sacred in the ancient world, and dangerous. They were neither here nor there, belonging to no single direction. They were places of possibility and peril, where travelers had to choose their way, where the lost became more lost, where offerings were left for gods and spirits. And it was at these crossroads that Hecate reigned supreme. She is often depicted holding torches, one in each hand, their flames pushing back the darkness just enough to see a few steps ahead. not illuminating everything, not banishing the night entirely, but providing just enough light to navigate by. This is her gift and her nature. She does not make the path clear, but she makes it possible to walk it. She does not remove the shadows, but she gives you light enough to move through them. In ancient art, especially in the earliest representations, she appears as a single figure, tall and serene, robed in the manner of a queen or priestess, those twin torches held steady. But later, as her cult evolved and spread, she took on a different form entirely. She became triple-bodied, three figures joined back to back to back, each face looking down a different road, each pair of eyes scanning a different direction. This triple form would become her most recognizable aspect, the image that would echo through centuries of art and literature. Three bodies, three faces, three paths. Past, present, and future. Birth, life, and death. Earth, sea, and sky. She who sees all directions at once, who stands at the center of all choices. The ancient Greeks did not fear her as they feared some gods, though they respected her deeply. She was not capricious like Ares, not jealous like Hera, not as remote as some Olympians who barely noticed mortal affairs. She was present in daily life in ways both comforting and unsettling. Every household had its threshold, that space between inside and out, and that threshold was hers. Many homes had small shrines to her, positioned at the door, protecting the space where the private world of the family met the public world of the street. She guarded those boundaries. She watched those transitions. She was invoked by those who worked magic, by those who sought to speak with the dead, by those who needed guidance at literal and metaphorical crossroads. But she was also called upon by mothers during childbirth, by sailors before a voyage, by farmers hoping for a good harvest, by anyone engaged in any endeavor that required transition from one state to another. Because that is what Hecate presides over. Transition, change, transformation. The moments when you are no longer what you were, but not yet what you will become. And she was called upon by those who walked at night. In a world without streetlights, without the ambient glow of cities, night was profound and total. To walk after dark was to move through a landscape transformed, familiar places rendered strange and treacherous. It was Hecate's time. The ancient Athenians knew better than to venture out carelessly after sunset, especially on certain nights of the month. They knew that the dark belonged to her, and to the spirits she commanded, and to forces that daylight kept at bay. But she was not simply a goddess of fear. She was also a protector. Her presence at the threshold meant that evil spirits could not easily enter. Her torches meant that travelers had light enough to find their way. Her keys, which she often carried, meant that she could open doors that others could not, granting passage to those under her protection. She was, in many ways, a guardian goddess, fierce and vigilant, watching over those who honored her. As you lie here in the darkness, perhaps you can imagine her as the ancient Greeks did. Not as a monster or a demon, not as something to be terrified of, but as a presence at the edge of perception, the sense that someone is watching over the threshold, the feeling that there is more to the darkness than empty space, the knowledge that crossroads exist not just on maps, but in time, in choice, in the turnings of a life. She is there, at every crossing, patient and eternal, her torches burning steady, her faces turned toward all directions, her keys hanging at her belt, waiting for those who call upon her name. This is the goddess we will explore tonight, not through battles or grand adventures, but through the slow accumulation of detail, through stories told in whispers, through rituals performed under dark moons, through the devotion of ancient worshippers who left offerings at crossroads and spoke her name with reverence and care. We will walk with her through the shadows of Greek mythology, and perhaps, in the walking, find our way to the peaceful darkness of sleep. Born of stars and destruction. To understand Hecate, you must first understand where she came from. And the answer to that question takes us back before the Olympians, before Zeus hurled his lightning and Poseidon claimed the seas. It takes us back to the time of the Titans, those primordial beings who ruled before the gods we know, beings of immense power who personified the fundamental forces of the cosmos. Hecate was born of two such titans. Her father was Perseus, whose name means the destroyer. He was not destruction for its own sake, but rather the cosmic force of destruction that precedes transformation. Old things must end for new things to begin. Structures must collapse for new structures to rise. This was Perseus, a deity of necessary endings, of the kind of obliteration that clears the way for creation. From him, Hecate inherited power over transformation, over the breaking down of one state and the emergence of another. Her mother was Asteria, the starry one, the goddess of night and falling stars, of prophetic dreams and the kind of knowledge that comes in darkness. Asteria was sister to Leto, who would become mother to Apollo and Artemis, making Hecate their cousin in the complex genealogy of the divine. But Asteria chose a different path than her sister. When Zeus pursued her, as he pursued so many goddesses, Asteria refused him. Rather than submit, she transformed herself into a quail and flung herself into the sea, where she became the island of Delos. It was on this island, formed from her transformed body, that Leto would later give birth to her divine children. This is significant because it tells us something about Hecate's maternal lineage. She came from a goddess who valued autonomy so highly that she would rather become stone than surrender her will. She came from a goddess associated with the stars, with the night sky, with the mysteries that reveal themselves only when the sun has set. She came from a goddess of prophecy, of seeing what is hidden, of understanding through means beyond ordinary perception. And perhaps she inherited that fierce independence, that refusal to be constrained by others' expectations, that made Asteria cast herself into the sea rather than bend to Zeus's desires. The union of Persis and Asteria was thus a union of destruction and starlight, of ending and knowing, of transformation and prophecy. And from this union came Hecate, a goddess who would embody all these qualities and more. She was, the ancient poet Hesiod tells us, an only child. Unlike many gods who had siblings with whom to share power and inheritance, Hecate stood alone, unique, receiving the full force of her parents' combined attributes. Her grandmother was Phoebe, one of the original Titans, whose name meant bright, and who was often associated with the moon. This lunar connection would persist in Hecate's cult, though she was not primarily a moon goddess in the way Selene was, or even Artemis. But the moon's connection to her was undeniable. The moon, like Hecate herself, presides over transformation, waxing and waning, dying and being reborn, marking the passage of time in cycles rather than straight lines. The moon belongs to the night, and so does Hecate. What made Hecate unusual even among Titans was the breadth of power attributed to her by Hesiod, whose The Theogony remains one of our earliest and most important sources for understanding the Greek gods. Writing in the 8th century before the Common Era, Hesiod devoted an unusually long passage to Hecate, praising her in terms that he used for few other deities. He wrote that Zeus, the son of Cronos, honored her above all others. He wrote that she received magnificent privileges, a share of the earth, the sea, and the starry heavens. He wrote that she had the power to grant or withhold blessings from mortals in nearly every aspect of life. This is remarkable, because Hecate was not an Olympian. She was not born of Zeus's line. She was not part of the new order of gods who had overthrown the Titans. And yet here was Hesiod, writing in the early days of Greek literature, insisting that this Titan goddess retained power that rivaled or exceeded that of many Olympians. She could grant victory in battle, success in athletic competitions, abundance in fishing and hunting, prosperity in herds and harvests. She could be invoked by kings seeking wisdom, by mothers seeking protection for their children, by anyone undertaking any significant endeavor. Why? The answer lies in what happened during the Great War that reshaped the cosmos, the conflict known as the Titanomachy. But before we reach that story, it's worth sitting with the image of Hecate as she was in those earliest days, before Zeus claimed his throne, before the world was divided among the victors of that cosmic war. Imagine her as she might have been then, a young goddess standing at the threshold between the age of Titans and the age that was coming. Her father's destructive force coiled within her, ready to unmake what needed unmaking. Her mother's starlight streaming from her fingertips, illuminating hidden truths. Her grandmother's lunar power flowing through her, marking cycles of transformation. She stood at a crossroads even then, faced with a choice that would define her place in the cosmos for all the ages to come. She was daughter of Perses and Asteria, granddaughter of Phoebe, inheritor of night and stars and the power of necessary destruction. She was Hecate, the torchbearer, the key-keeper, the one who watches from the threshold. And she was about to make a decision that would preserve her power when nearly all the other Titans lost theirs. A choice that changed everything. The cosmos was at war. On one side stood the Titans, the ancient powers who had ruled since the beginning, led by Kronos, the father who had devoured his own children to prevent the prophecy of his overthrow. On the other side stood Zeus and his siblings, the Olympians, the new gods who had escaped Kronos's belly and now sought to claim the heavens, the earth, and the seas for themselves. The conflict was not just a war. It was a fundamental reordering of reality, a changing of cosmic guards. And every deity had to choose a side. This was the Titanomachy, a word that means war of the Titans, but which might better be understood as the war between the old order and the new, between the primordial forces and the organized pantheon, between one age and another. It lasted for 10 years, or so the myths tell us, though time itself may have functioned differently in that epoch before the world took its final form. Mountains were torn apart, seas boiled, the very fabric of reality strained under the weight of divine conflict. Most Titans sided with Kronos. They were, after all, of his generation, beings who had known the cosmos before Zeus was born, who had ruled when he was nothing but a hidden infant on Crete, protected from his father's hunger. They had no reason to believe this upstart son would triumph, and every reason to support the established order. But not all Titans made this choice. Hecate looked at the war spreading across the cosmos, considered her options with the same careful attention she would later apply to every crossroads, and chose Zeus. Or perhaps she chose neutrality, which in that context amounted to the same thing. She did not fight for Kronos. She did not lend her considerable power to maintaining the old order. Whether she actively aided Zeus or simply withdrew her support from the Titans, the result was the same. She positioned herself on the side that would ultimately win. This decision was not made lightly. In choosing Zeus, or in choosing not to oppose him, Hecate was betting on transformation, on the necessary destruction of what was to make room for what would be. This should perhaps not surprise us. She was, after all, daughter of Perses, the Titan of destruction that precedes renewal. In some fundamental way, she understood that the age of the Titans was ending, that their time had passed, that the cosmos was ready for something new. And rather than cling to the old order, she facilitated its transition. The war ended as prophesied. Zeus and his siblings triumphed. Kronos was overthrown, cast into Tartarus along with most of the Titans who had fought for him. The cosmos was divided. Zeus took the sky, Poseidon the sea, Hades the underworld. A new order was established, new gods claiming new domains, new powers shaping the world. And the Titans who had opposed this transition lost nearly everything. But not Hecate. When the dust settled and Zeus sat upon his throne, he remembered the goddess who had not opposed him. He remembered her wisdom, her power, her choice, and in recognition of this, he made her an offer that no other Titan received. He allowed her to keep her privileges. He confirmed her power over earth, sea, and sky. He granted honors that some Olympians did not possess. She alone among the Titans retained her full authority, her full domains, her full ability to intervene in mortal and divine affairs. This makes Hecate unique in the Greek pantheon. She is a bridge between the old world and the new, between the age of Titans and the age of Olympians. She belongs fully to neither, and yet she is honored by both. She is ancient, predating Zeus himself, and yet she serves the new order. She is outside the Olympian hierarchy, and yet Zeus himself acknowledged her supremacy in her domains. She is, in every sense, liminal, existing at the threshold between one age and one other boundaries. The other gods regarded her with a mixture of respect and wariness. She was not one of them, not quite. She had not fought beside them in the war, had not shared in their victory feast, had not been assigned a domain by Zeus because she already possessed hers. She was other, different, separate. And perhaps this otherness contributed to her later associations with the strange, the uncanny, the liminal spaces of existence. But in these early days, according to Hesiod, she was primarily seen as a beneficent goddess, a bestower of blessings, a granter of wishes. She had survived the transition between ages with her power intact, and she used that power to aid those who called upon her. Warriors prayed to her for victory. Athletes invoked her before competitions. Fishermen asked her for good catches. Shepherds requested her protection for their flocks. She was, in Hesiod's account, a goddess intimately involved in the daily lives of mortals, generous with her aid, powerful in her interventions. Why did Zeus allow this? Perhaps because he recognized that some powers are too fundamental to be overthrown, too deeply woven into the fabric of reality to be extracted without unraveling everything. Hecate's power over transformation, over the thresholds between states, over the night and its mysteries, these were not things that could be simply reassigned to another deity. They were essential functions of the cosmos, and Hecate was their mistress. To strip her of these powers would be to damage reality itself. Or perhaps Zeus, in his wisdom, understood that having a goddess who bridged the old and new orders was valuable. Hecate could speak to both ages, could mediate between the ancient powers and the new gods, could ensure continuity even as everything changed. She was a living symbol that the transition from Titan to Olympian was not total destruction, but transformation, that some things endured, that the cosmos maintained its fundamental patterns even as its rulers changed. Whatever Zeus's reasoning, the result was clear. Hecate emerged from the Titanomachy with her status enhanced, not diminished. She was honored by the king of the gods. She retained her triple domain. She was acknowledged as a power unto herself, answerable to Zeus, but not subordinate to him in the way the other Olympians were. She had made her choice at the crossroads of cosmic change, and that choice had positioned her perfectly for the ages to come. As you lie here in the darkness, consider what this means. Hecate chose transformation over stagnation. She chose the future over the past. She chose to adapt rather than resist, to flow with change rather than be broken by it. And this choice, made at the threshold between ages, would define her character forever after. She is the goddess of crossroads because she understood, perhaps better than any other deity, that crossroads are where history is made, where the future is chosen, where one age ends and another begins. The Titanomachy was not just a war. It was the greatest crossroads the cosmos had ever known. And Hecate, the torchbearer, the one who watches all paths at once, made her choice with the wisdom that would become her hallmark. She chose the path that led to transformation, and in doing so, she secured her place in the new order while retaining the power of the old. She became a goddess of transitions because she successfully navigated the greatest transition of all. When Zeus confirmed Hecate's privileges after the Titanomachy, he was acknowledging something remarkable. Most gods had specific domains, carefully delineated areas of authority. Poseidon had the sea, not the sky. Demeter had agriculture, not the underworld. Ares had war, not wisdom. But Hecate's power was different. She had authority over not one realm, but three: the earth, the sea, and the sky. This triple dominion made her almost unique among deities, second perhaps only to Zeus himself in the breadth of her reach. Let us consider what this meant in practical terms. On earth, Hecate had power over all that walked, grew, or occurred on the land surface and in its depths. She was invoked for good harvests, for the health of herds, for success in hunting. She was called upon at births, for she presided over that threshold between non-existence and life. She was present at deaths, for she also watched over that final crossing. Every path that humans walked, every road they traveled, every boundary they crossed, these fell under her purview, and especially those places where paths intersected, where three roads met, where travelers had to choose their direction. These were most sacred to her. This is why even today, when we speak of being at a crossroads, we mean a moment of decision, a point where the future is uncertain and multiple paths present themselves. This metaphor comes directly from ancient understanding of Hecate's domain. But her power extended beyond the earth. She also had authority over the sea, that vast realm that the Greeks both feared and depended upon. The sea was Poseidon's domain, yes, but Hecate too had her share of it. She was invoked by fishermen hoping for good catches, by sailors hoping for safe passage. The sea, like the crossroads, was a liminal space. Neither solid land nor empty air, but something between, something that connected distant shores while simultaneously separating them. It was appropriate that Hecate, the goddess of in-between places, should have power there. And she had power over the sky as well, the realm of Zeus himself. Not the bright daylight sky, perhaps, but the night sky, the domain of stars and moon, and the profound darkness between celestial bodies. Her mother had been Asteria, goddess of stars and falling meteors. Her grandmother was Phoebe, whose name meant bright and who was associated with the moon. Hecate inherited these celestial connections, becoming one of several goddesses associated with the moon, though her lunar aspects were quite different from those of Selene or Artemis. Where Selene was the moon itself, radiant and remote, and Artemis was associated with its silver light in the hunt, Hecate was connected to the dark moon, the time when the moon's face is hidden, when the night is at its deepest. She was invoked during the new moon, that transitional moment when the old lunar cycle has ended and the new one not yet begun. Again, we see her nature as a goddess of thresholds, of in-between times, of the moments when one thing has ceased and another has not yet started. This triple domain gave Hecate immense versatility and power. She could be invoked for almost anything because her authority touched almost everything. Need help with a harvest? Call upon Hecate of the earth. Need protection during a sea voyage? Call upon Hecate of the waters. Need guidance in understanding the stars or navigating by night? Call upon Hecate of the sky. She was a universal goddess in a way that most deities were not, able to intervene in nearly any aspect of life. But her domains extended beyond these physical realms. She also had authority over more abstract territories. She was a goddess of magic, perhaps the goddess of magic in the Greek world. Where other gods might use magical means to accomplish their ends, Hecate was magic itself, the mistress of those arts that transformed reality through will and word and ritual. Witches and sorcerers called upon her, sought her favor, invoked her in their spells. The most famous witches of Greek mythology, Medea and Circe, were said by some to be her daughters or her devotees, drawing their power from her. She was a goddess of ghosts and the restless dead. When spirits lingered on earth, unable or unwilling to descend fully into Hades' realm, they fell under Hecate's purview. She could command them, compel them, dismiss them. She could grant them temporary form or strip them of what little substance they possessed. Necromancers, those who sought to speak with the dead, invoked Hecate to make such communication possible. She stood at the threshold between life and death, between the living world and the underworld, and she could facilitate passage across that boundary. She was a goddess of night itself, not just the absence of light, but the positive presence of darkness with all its mysteries and dangers and revelations. Night was her time. The ancient Athenians knew to be cautious after dark, to honor Hecate, to perhaps leave offerings to secure her protection. Because night was when the boundaries between worlds grew thin, when spirits walked, when magic was strongest, when the familiar became strange. And all of this was Hecate's domain. She was a goddess of doorways and entrances, of gates and thresholds. Every time someone crossed from outside to inside, from public space to private, from the street into the home, they crossed a boundary that Hecate protected. Many Greek households had shrines to her at their doors, small altars where offerings could be left to secure her favor and protection. She guarded the threshold, kept malevolent spirits from entering, blessed those who passed through with her sanction. She was a goddess of keys, an appropriate symbol for one who controlled so many passages and transitions. She held the keys that could unlock doors others couldn't even see. Keys to the underworld, keys to hidden knowledge, keys to transformation. In art, she was often depicted holding a key, sometimes a large ornate one, sometimes a simple iron key, but always a key, always the symbol of her power to open what was closed, to grant access to what was hidden, to facilitate passage where passage had seemed impossible. She was a goddess of dogs, those liminal animals who exist between wild and domestic, who can see spirits that humans cannot, who guard boundaries and alert their masters to approaching danger. Dogs were sacred to Hecate, and she was often accompanied by a pack of supernatural hounds. At her rituals, dogs were sometimes sacrificed, a practice unusual in Greek religion, which typically reserved such offerings for chthonic deities of the underworld. But Hecate, though not fully of the underworld, partook of its nature, and the dog sacrifice acknowledged this. She was a goddess of poisons and drugs, of the pharmakeia that could heal or harm depending on dosage and intent. The word pharmacy comes from this Greek root, but in ancient times it carried darker connotations. A pharmakon could be medicine or poison, remedy or curse. Hecate understood these substances, knew their properties, could enhance or negate their effects. Herbalists and healers invoked her, but so did poisoners and those seeking vengeance through hidden means. She was a goddess of protection, invoked by travelers, by those embarking on dangerous journeys, by anyone moving from one state to another. Parents called upon her during childbirth, that dangerous threshold between pregnancy and motherhood, between potential life and actual life. Her protection was not always gentle, but it was powerful. She could be fierce in defense of those under her care, and fierce against those who threatened them. She was a goddess of choices, naturally, given her association with crossroads. When decisions had to be made, when the way forward was unclear, when multiple paths presented themselves, Hecate was there. She did not make the choice for you. That was not her way. But she illuminated the options, held her torches so you could see a little farther down each path, provided what clarity was possible in an inherently uncertain situation. And then she watched as you chose, and walked with you down whichever road you took. All of these domains, all of these aspects came together in the figure of Hecate. She was not a simple goddess with a straightforward portfolio. She was complex, multifaceted, her authority extending in many directions, her nature expressing itself in many ways. This made her powerful, but it also made her somewhat difficult to categorize. She didn't fit neatly into the organizational schemes that later mythographers tried to impose on the Greek pantheon. She was too broad, too ancient, too fundamentally liminal to be pinned down to a single role or realm. And this, perhaps, is why she endured. While other gods' cults waxed and waned, while some deities faded from worship as their particular functions became less relevant, Hecate remained. Because life is full of thresholds. Every day brings transitions, choices, movements from one state to another. Every person navigates boundaries, crosses from one realm into another, makes decisions at crossroads, both literal and metaphorical. And as long as this is true, as long as human existence involves change and choice and transformation, Hecate's domains remain relevant. So she stands there still, in the imagination and in the mythology, a goddess of 3 realms and 1,000 aspects, holding her torches, carrying her keys, commanding her hounds, watching all paths at once. Mistress of earth, sea, and sky, guardian of crossroads, doorways, and every threshold between. Ancient beyond the Olympians, yet honored by them. Powerful enough to challenge any god, yet choosing instead to stand apart, to maintain her unique position at the boundaries of things. She is Hecate, and her domains are as vast as the night sky, and as intimate as the moment when you cross your own threshold and close the door behind you. Sacred symbols and companions. If you saw Hecate approaching in the darkness, you would know her by what she carried and what accompanied her. Gods are often recognized by their attributes, the objects they hold that signal their identity and power. Zeus has his lightning bolt, Poseidon his trident, Athena her aegis and spear. And Hecate has her torches, always 2 of them, 1 in each hand, flames burning steady and unwavering, even in the wind. These torches are perhaps her most recognizable attribute. They appear in nearly every artistic representation of her, held high or low, crossed before her, or extended out to either side, but always present, always burning. The torches serve practical purposes, of course. They illuminate the path through darkness. They allow travelers to see where they're going, to avoid pitfalls and obstacles, to navigate by night. But Hecate's torches are more than simple light sources. They are symbols of her deeper function. She holds them when she stands at the crossroads, and their light shows you the paths available to you, though not always which path you should take. She held them when she searched for Persephone alongside Demeter, using them to pierce the darkness that surrounded that mystery. She holds them when she moves between the worlds, their flames somehow burning in places where ordinary fire could not survive. Her torches are extensions of her power, manifestations of her ability to bring illumination to dark places, both literal and metaphorical. The flames themselves are described as unwavering, unaffected by wind or rain, burning with a steadiness that suggests divine power. They do not sputter or smoke or threaten to go out. They are certainty in a world of uncertainty, constancy in a realm of change. And yet they are also symbols of transformation, because fire is itself transformative, changing whatever it touches, consuming the old to make room for the new. Like Hecate herself, the torches embody both stability and change, illumination and mystery. She also carries keys, sometimes depicted as a single large key, sometimes as a ring of many keys, but always keys. The symbolism is clear. Hecate can unlock what is locked, can open what is closed, can grant passage through barriers that stop others. She holds the keys to the underworld, allowing her to move freely between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. She holds keys to hidden knowledge, to magical secrets, to mysteries that remain sealed to ordinary mortals. She holds the keys to transformation itself, that ultimate unlocking, where you cease to be what you were and become what you will be. In ancient art, these keys are often large and ornate, the kind that might open a temple door or a treasure chest, objects of substance and weight. They are not delicate things easily lost or broken. They are solid, permanent, as enduring as Hecate herself. And they remind us that she is a gatekeeper, a guardian of passages, one who controls access to realms and states that others cannot enter without her permission. She carries or wears a dagger, sometimes a single blade, sometimes a pair. The dagger is a weapon, yes, capable of both defense and attack. But it is also a tool used in rituals, for cutting herbs, for blood sacrifice, for marking boundaries that must not be crossed. The dagger represents Hecate's more dangerous aspects, her capacity for violence, her role as a protector who will not hesitate to destroy threats. It represents the cutting of ties, the severing of connections, the decisive action that sometimes must accompany transformation. But her most faithful companions are not objects, but animals. Dogs accompany Hecate constantly, often depicted as black dogs, sometimes as pale, ghostly hounds, but always dogs. These are not pets in the modern sense, but sacred animals, beings that partake of her nature and serve her purposes. The ancient Greeks understood that dogs occupy a strange position. They are domesticated, living with humans, serving human needs. But they are also descended from wolves, retaining some wildness, some connection to the untamed world beyond civilization's boundaries. They are, like Hecate herself, liminal creatures. Moreover, dogs can see and hear things humans cannot. They perceive spirits, sense approaching danger, detect presences that remain invisible to mortal eyes. This made them appropriate companions for a goddess who moves between worlds, who sees all paths at once, who perceives what is hidden. Hecate's hounds were said to be able to track souls, to follow spirits through the darkness, to alert her to any approach, whether by living or dead. The dogs also served as her heralds. Their barking announced her presence, warned mortals that she was near. On nights sacred to her, people would hear dogs howling throughout the city, and they would know that Hecate was abroad with her pack, that the boundaries between worlds had grown thin, that they should stay inside and secure their doors. The howling of dogs became, in a sense, her voice, the sound of her moving through the darkness. One of Hecate's sacred dogs had once been human. The story goes that Hecuba, queen of Troy, was transformed into a dog after the fall of her city. Driven mad by grief and rage, having witnessed the destruction of everything she held dear, Hecuba was changed into a black dog who leapt into the sea. But instead of drowning, she became one of Hecate's hounds, finding in this transformation a strange form of immortality. It's a grim tale, but it illustrates how Hecate offered a kind of sanctuary, even to those transformed by tragedy, how she took in the outcast and the changed. She also kept a polecat as a companion, another creature of threshold and boundary. The polecat, related to the weasel and ferret, was a domestic animal in the ancient world, kept to hunt vermin, much as cats would be in later times. But it was also wild, untamable, despite its utility, savage when cornered, and it occupied the space between outside and inside, hunting in houses, but never quite belonging to them, tolerated but not beloved. The story of how the polecat became sacred to Hecate involves Galinthios, a servant girl who helped Alcmene give birth to Heracles. Hera, jealous wife of Zeus and enemy of all her husband's children by other women, had sent the goddess of childbirth to prevent Heracles from being born. Eileithyia sat outside Alcmene's room with her arms and legs crossed, magically preventing the birth. Galinthios, clever and loyal, ran out and announced that the baby had already been born. Eileithyia, startled, uncrossed her limbs, and in that instant Heracles was born. But for her deception, Galinthios was transformed into a polecat by the angry goddess. Hecate, taking pity on the girl, or perhaps admiring her cleverness, adopted the polecat Galinthios as one of her familiars. Again, we see Hecate offering sanctuary to those transformed, taking in the outcast, providing a place for those who no longer fit into ordinary categories. The polecat, like the dog, became a herald of her presence. If you saw a polecat in an unusual place, heard its distinctive call, it might be a sign that Hecate was near, that magic was at work, that the boundaries had shifted. Hecate was also associated with certain plants, particularly those with magical or poisonous properties. Aconitite, also called wolfsbane or monkshood, was sacred to her. This plant is deadly poisonous, capable of killing with a small dose, but it was also used in small amounts in ancient medicine. Again, the theme of the pharmacon, the substance that heals or harms, depending on how it's used. Hecate understood such things, knew the properties of every plant, could teach their uses to those who sought her instruction. Red mullet fish were associated with her, left as offerings at the crossroads. Eggs were sacred to her, symbols of potential, of the threshold between non-existence and life. Garlic, onions, and leeks, strong-smelling bulbs that grow underground, were offered to her, perhaps because they embodied the connection between upper and lower realms, between Earth's surface and its depths. Honey cakes were left for her at crossroads, small offerings to secure her favor or thank her for protection granted. These cakes, called paisai, would be placed at the juncture of 3 roads, positioned so that Hecate could reach them from any direction she chose to approach. And the rule was strict. Once you placed the offering, you walked away without looking back. To look back was to risk seeing something you shouldn't, to break the boundary between the mortal and divine realms in ways that could drive you mad. All of these symbols and companions, objects and animals and plants, built up a complex iconography around Hecate. She was not a simple goddess, and her symbols reflected this complexity. The torches that illuminate and transform, the keys that unlock and grant passage, the dagger that protects and severs, the dogs that guard and herald, the polecat that occupies boundaries, the poisonous and healing herbs, all of them appropriate to a goddess whose very nature was faceted, who stood at so many thresholds, who could manifest in so many ways. And when you saw these symbols, when you encountered a black dog at night, or found a polecat in an unexpected place, when you smelled a conatite growing wild, or came across a honey cake left at a crossroads, you knew. You knew that you were in Hecate's territory, that you had entered her domain, that the goddess of thresholds was near, and you would either say a prayer for her protection or hurry on your way, depending on your relationship with the keeper of crossroads, the holder of keys, the bearer of torches whose flames never waver, even in the deepest darkness. Of all the myths involving Hecate, none is more famous or more defining of her character than the story of Persephone's abduction. It is here that we see Hecate at her most active, her most compassionate, her most essential. And it is through this myth that she became forever associated with Demeter and Persephone, forming a trinity of goddesses connected by tragedy, transformation, and the eternal cycle of seasons. The story begins in a meadow, as many Greek myths do, with a young goddess gathering flowers. Persephone, daughter of Zeus and Demeter, maiden goddess of spring's first growth, was out with her companions, nymphs and goddesses of youth and nature. They picked flowers in the warm sunlight, laughing and talking, the kind of innocent scene that Greek mythology often uses to set up its darkest moments. But this was no ordinary meadow. Zeus, king of the gods, had conspired with his brother Hades to bring about what was to follow. He had promised Persephone to Hades as a bride, agreed to the match without consulting either the girl or her mother, Demeter. This was not unusual in Greek mythology, where women were often treated as property to be traded between male relatives. But the manner of the marriage's beginning would have consequences that reshaped the world. Among the flowers growing in that meadow was a narcissus, a flower of unusual beauty, more radiant and fragrant than any Persephone had seen before. It was a trap, a lure, placed there specifically to draw her away from her companions. She moved toward it, reaching out to pluck it, and in that moment the earth split open. Up from the crack came Hades in his golden chariot, lord of the underworld, king of the dead, coming to claim his bride. He seized Persephone before she could react, pulled her into the chariot, and turned his immortal horses back toward the underworld. The earth closed behind them, swallowing the chariot, the god, and the screaming girl, leaving only crushed flowers and the echo of her cries. Her companions stood frozen, unable to help, barely comprehending what had happened. In a moment, in less than a moment, Persephone was gone. Most of the gods witnessed nothing. Zeus had conveniently absented himself, gone to one of his temples to receive mortal sacrifices, placing himself where he could not be asked to intervene. The Olympians went about their business, unaware or unconcerned that the world had just changed forever. But two beings did perceive something of what happened. Helios, the sun god, sees everything that occurs under his light. From his chariot as he drives across the sky, nothing on earth is hidden from him. He saw Hades emerge, saw Persephone taken, saw the earth close. But Helios did not intervene. He was a god of older generation, respectful of Zeus's authority. And if Zeus had sanctioned this marriage, it was not Helios's place to object. So he continued his daily journey across the heavens, bearing witness, but offering no aid. The other witness was Hecate. She was in her cave when Persephone was taken, deep in the earth or in a mountainside, some place of shadow and stone where the torchbearer made her home. From this cave, Hecate heard Persephone's screams. Not the words, perhaps, but the raw terror, the desperate plea for help. Hecate heard, and she emerged from her cave, torches in hand, searching for the source of those cries. But by the time she reached the meadow, there was nothing to see. No Persephone, no Hades, no torn earth. Only the flowers, only the confused nymphs, only the profound absence where a young goddess had been moments before. Hecate searched through that day and into the night, her torches illuminating the darkness, but she could not find Persephone. She had heard the abduction, but had not witnessed it, and now the victim had vanished completely. Meanwhile, Demeter, goddess of agriculture and harvest, Persephone's mother, had discovered her daughter's disappearance. The ancient hymns describe her grief in terms that still resonate millennia later. She rent her veil, tore her hair, threw off her cloak, and began to search. For 9 days and nights she wandered the earth, holding torches just as Hecate did, calling Persephone's name, asking every god and every mortal if they had seen her daughter. She refused to eat ambrosia, would not drink nectar, did not bathe. She was a mother consumed by grief and fear, thinking only of her lost child. On the 10th day, Demeter encountered Hecate. The torchbearer approached the grieving mother and spoke the words that would begin the unraveling of the mystery. "Queenly Demeter," she said, "I heard your daughter's voice. I heard her cry out, but I could not see who took her. I would tell you the truth if I knew it, but I know only that she was taken, that someone seized her against her will." It was not much information, but it was more than Demeter had before. At least now she knew that Persephone had been abducted, that this was not a matter of the girl wandering off and getting lost. Someone had taken her deliberately, violently. But who? Hecate could not say. She had heard, but not seen. Together then, the two goddesses sought out Helios. With torches in their hands, Demeter, still bearing hers from 9 days of searching, and Hecate with her eternal flames, They approached the sun god as he prepared to begin another day's journey across the sky. They stood before his horses and demanded to know what he had seen. Helios, who sees all, told the truth. He told Demeter that Zeus had given Persephone to Hades, that her brother and father had conspired to marry her daughter to the Lord of the dead without her knowledge or consent. He told her that Hades had taken Persephone to the underworld, that she now dwelt in his dark realm, that she had become his queen. And then, perhaps meaning to comfort, but achieving the opposite, he suggested that Demeter should accept this. Hades was not an unworthy husband. He ruled 1/3 of the cosmos. It could have been worse. Demeter was not comforted. She was enraged. She felt betrayed by her brother Zeus, horrified at the thought of her daughter in the underworld, devastated that Persephone had been taken without even the pretense of consent. And in her rage and grief, Demeter withdrew her blessings from the earth. She who made crops grow refused to exercise her power. She who brought forth the harvest withheld her gifts. The earth, sympathizing with its goddess, or perhaps simply responding to her absence, became barren. This is where the myth becomes an explanation for the seasons. Because Demeter mourned, because she would not allow anything to grow until her daughter was returned, humanity faced its first winter. Nothing sprouted, nothing ripened. Famine spread across the earth. Mortals began to die, and with them died the sacrifices they offered to the gods. The Olympians, dependent on mortal worship and offerings, began to grow concerned. During this time, Hecate remained with Demeter. She did not return to her cave or her usual haunts. She stayed with the grieving mother, accompanying her, offering what comfort she could, holding her torches through the long darkness of Demeter's despair. She had witnessed how, partially, the beginning of this tragedy. She would not abandon its victims now. Eventually, Zeus was forced to intervene. He could not allow humanity to die out entirely, and he could not allow the other gods to starve for lack of offerings. He sent Hermes, the messenger god, to the underworld with instructions. Hades must return Persephone. The marriage that had begun with abduction must be at least partially undone. But Hades, who had perhaps genuinely come to care for Persephone in his way, or who simply wanted to maintain some claim on her, was clever. Before he allowed Persephone to leave, he offered her pomegranate seeds. And Persephone, whether through hunger or naivety, or because she had actually begun to acclimate to her new realm, ate them. Only a few. Only 6 seeds, or 4 or 3, depending on which version of the myth you follow, but it was enough. By eating food of the underworld, Persephone bound herself to it. She could not leave completely, not anymore. A compromise was reached. She would spend part of each year with her mother in the upper world, bringing spring and summer with her presence, but she would spend the other part of each year in the underworld with Hades. And during her absence, Demeter would mourn, and the earth would be barren, giving humanity autumn and winter. When Persephone finally emerged from the underworld and was reunited with Demeter, Hecate was there. The ancient hymn describes the moment. Then bright-combed Hecate came near to them, and often did she embrace the daughter of holy Demeter. Hecate embraced Persephone, welcomed her back, celebrated her return. And then she made a decision that would define the rest of the myth and much of her own future role. Hecate became Persephone's companion. When the young goddess descended each year to the underworld, Hecate went with her, guiding her with torches through the darkness, protecting her, keeping her company in that realm of shadows. And when Persephone returned to the surface, Hecate emerged with her, though she would always go back down when the time came. She became a constant presence in Persephone's life, a guide and guardian, a goddess who could move between the worlds and help Persephone do the same. This role suited Hecate perfectly. She was already a goddess of transitions, of thresholds, of the space between one state and another. Now she became the guide for the ultimate transition, the journey between life and death, between the upper world and the underworld, between Demeter's realm of growth and Hades' realm of shadows. Twice a year, every year, she made this journey with her torches lighting the way through passages that would terrify ordinary mortals. The myth established several important things about Hecate. It showed her compassion. She did not have to help Demeter search for Persephone. She did not have to stay with the grieving mother through those dark months. She did not have to become Persephone's companion and guide. But she chose to do all of these things. Behind the awesome power and the fearsome reputation, there was a goddess capable of deep empathy, willing to stand beside those who suffered. It also demonstrated her unique position in the cosmos. She could move between the underworld and the upper world freely, something few gods could do. Hermes could as a messenger, Hades as its ruler, but most deities were bound to their realms. Hecate alone seemed to have unrestricted passage, to be equally at home in both worlds, to be able to guide others between them. This made her invaluable to Persephone, who had to make this journey repeatedly, who needed someone who understood both realms and could protect her in both. And it connected her forever to the cycle of seasons, to the death and rebirth of the natural world, to the great pattern of life and death and renewal. When crops withered in autumn, it was because Persephone descended to the underworld, guided by Hecate's torches. When the first green shoots appeared in spring, it was because Persephone had returned, brought back by Hecate's light. The goddess of crossroads had become the guide through the ultimate crossing, the threshold between life and death itself. The relationship between Hecate, Demeter, and Persephone became one of the most important divine trinities in Greek religion. They were worshipped together at Eleusis, site of the famous mysteries, rituals that promised initiates a better fate after death. These mysteries were secret, their details never fully revealed. But we know that they involved reenacting Persephone's descent and return, that they dealt with themes of death and rebirth, that they offered hope of continuity beyond mortality. And Hecate was central to them, the guide, the torchbearer, the one who knew the way through the darkness. So, when you think of Hecate in this myth, do not think only of her power or her fearsome aspects. Think also of her standing beside Demeter through months of grief, searching with her, supporting her. Think of her embracing Persephone when the girl finally emerged from the underworld, welcoming her back to light and life. Think of her descending year after year to guide Persephone through the darkness, ensuring that the young goddess never had to make that journey alone. She is the torchbearer not just in a metaphorical sense, but in a very literal one. Her flames light the path between life and death, between the world of growth and the world of shadows. She is the constant companion, the faithful guide, the one who appears at the threshold with her lights burning steady, ready to show the way. And this, perhaps more than anything else, defines her character and her role in Greek mythology. The Deipnon, rituals at the dark moon. In the ancient world, worship was not a matter of Sunday mornings or once-a-week obligations. It was woven into the fabric of daily life, manifesting in household rituals, public festivals, and personal devotions. And for Hecate, one ritual stood above all others in importance and persistence: the Deipnon, the supper of Hecate, celebrated on the last night of the lunar month. The Greeks measured time by the moon, tracking its phases from new to full to dark again. Each month was a cycle, a period of growth and waning that mirrored larger patterns in nature and life. And the last day of this month, the day of the dark moon when no lunar light shone in the sky, this day belonged to Hecate. It was her special time, the moment when her power was strongest, when the boundaries between worlds were thinnest, when the dead were most likely to walk, and magic was most potent. The Deipnon was practiced by nearly every Greek household. This was not an obscure mystery cult or an elite ritual available only to initiates. It was a common practice, something that families did routinely, month after month, year after year. The details might vary slightly from household to household, but the basic structure remained consistent. You cleaned your house, you prepared offerings, and you left them for Hecate at the crossroads, all while the moon was dark. Let us walk through the ritual as it might have been performed in Athens in the classical period, say in the 4th century before the Common Era. You are the head of a household, responsible for maintaining your family's relationship with the gods, for ensuring that your home remains free of pollution and protected from malevolent spirits. The lunar month is ending. You can see, or rather not see, that the moon has dwindled to nothing, that the night sky is darker than usual. The Deipnon is approaching. You begin with purification. The Greeks called this katairen, the ritual cleansing of the home and its inhabitants. You take out a broom and sweep the entire house thoroughly, not just casually, but with the intention of removing not just physical dirt, but spiritual pollution as well. Any lingering bad fortune, any accumulated ill will, any residue of arguments or troubles, you sweep it all toward the door. You gather the sweepings carefully, because they will be part of your offering. Next, you might fumigate the house. You would take a clay censer, fill it with burning coals, sprinkle incense over the coals, and carry this through every room. The smoke cleanses, purifies, drives out any malevolent presences. The ancient Greeks took the spiritual health of their homes seriously. They understood that just as physical cleanliness required maintenance, spiritual cleanliness did too. And the Deipnon was the monthly occasion for this deep cleaning. If your household has accumulated any significant pollution during the month, if anyone has committed an offense against the gods or violated a taboo, if something wrong has been done even unknowingly, the Deipnon is the time to address it. In serious cases, a dog might be sacrificed to Hecate as a scapegoat. Each member of the household would touch the dog, symbolically transferring their misdeeds onto it, and then the animal would be killed as an offering. The head of the household would read the entrails, seeking confirmation that the sacrifice had been accepted, that the pollution had been lifted. This practice was uncommon and reserved for serious situations, but it illustrates the lengths to which the Greeks would go to maintain right relationship with Hecate and through her with the divine realm. Now comes the preparation of the actual supper. The Greeks called these deipna, evening meals, and they consisted of specific foods: eggs, fish, garlic, onions or leeks, honey cakes, and bread. Sometimes cheese was included. These were not elaborate offerings, not roasted meats or fine wines, but simple, specific items. Each had its significance. Eggs represented potential, the threshold between non-existence and life. Fish might represent Hecate's dominion over the sea. Garlic and onions, strong-smelling bulbs that grow underground, connected the surface world to the realms below. Honey cakes were traditional offerings to many gods, sweet and precious. Bread was the staff of life, basic nourishment. You would arrange these offerings on a plate or in a basket. Some households had special dishes used only for this purpose, vessels that were themselves sacred, reserved for the monthly offering to Hecate. And you would do all of this before the sun set, while the dark day was ending and the dark night was beginning. Because the Deipnon was a nighttime ritual, performed in darkness, when Hecate's power was at its peak. Then comes the difficult part. You must take the offerings to a crossroads. If you are fortunate enough to have a shrine to Hecate where your property meets the street, where the private world of your doorstep intersects with the public world of the road, you can leave the offerings there. Many Greek households had exactly such shrines, small altars positioned at their doorways, sometimes just simple stone pillars called Hecataia, sometimes more elaborate structures with niches for offerings, and perhaps a carved representation of the triple-formed goddess. But the ideal location is a triodos, a three-way crossroads, where three paths meet. These places were sacred to Hecate, belonged to her more completely than any other location. So, if possible, you would carry your offerings to such a place. And here is where the ritual becomes more fearsome. You are going out after dark, carrying food for a goddess of ghosts and magic, walking to a crossroads that everyone knows is haunted and dangerous. You are doing this on the night of the dark moon, when Hecate is most active, when the dead are most likely to walk, when evil spirits are most likely to be abroad. You reach the crossroads. You place the offerings on the ground. Position them so they can be accessed from any of the three directions. You might say a prayer, something simple like, "Hail, Hecate, guardian of crossroads, protector of the household, accept this offering." You might include a specific request for protection in the coming month, or give thanks for protection already granted. You might stand for a moment in silence, acknowledging the goddess's presence in this sacred place. And then comes the most important part of the ritual. You turn and walk away without looking back. This rule was absolute, and everyone knew it. You do not look back at the offering. You do not check to see if someone is taking it. You do not glance over your shoulder. You walk away with your eyes forward, returning to your home, and you do not look back. The reasons for this prohibition were clear to the ancient Greeks. The offerings did not belong to you anymore. They belonged to Hecate and to the spirits she commanded, the restless dead who followed her. If you looked back, you might see something you weren't meant to see. You might see spirits feeding on the offerings, or Hecate herself claiming them, or things that existed in the spaces between worlds, things that were not meant for mortal eyes. And if you saw such things, the ancient Greeks believed, you could be driven mad, or cursed, or marked in ways that would haunt you. So you walked away without looking back, and when you reached your home, you felt relief. You had performed the Deipnon. You had honored Hecate. Your house was purified. The coming month was secured, at least as much as any mortal could secure it. And now you could rest, knowing that the goddess of crossroads had received her due and would, hopefully, extend her protection to your household in return. What happened to the offerings after you left them? The Greeks had practical understandings alongside their spiritual beliefs. They knew that the poor might take the food, hungry people who saw the offerings and snatched them up as soon as the offerer was out of sight. This was not considered sacrilege exactly. The offerings had been given to Hecate, and if she chose to redistribute them to the poor, that was her prerogative. There was even a proverb about this. Whatever is thrown or dropped is lost to this world. Whatever is caught is gained. If you could catch the offerings before they touched the ground, before they were fully given to the goddess, they were yours. But once they touched the earth at the crossroads, they belonged to Hecate. Animals would eat the offerings too. Dogs especially. Those animals sacred to Hecate would appear seemingly from nowhere to consume the food left at crossroads. This was seen perfectly appropriate. The dogs were Hecate's creatures. If they ate the offerings, it was because she had sent them, because she was accepting the gift through her sacred animals. And sometimes the food would simply disappear, vanish completely by morning, with no sign of who or what had taken it. And this too was acceptable. Hecate worked through mysterious means. Her acceptance of offerings did not need to be visible or explainable. The Deipnon was practiced for centuries. It persisted long after many other Greek religious practices had faded or been suppressed. Even after Christianity became the dominant religion in the Mediterranean world, even after the old gods were officially abandoned, the Deipnon continued. There are records of Christian clergy in the Byzantine period complaining about people still leaving offerings at crossroads, still honoring Hecate despite the new faith. The ritual was too deeply ingrained, too much a part of the monthly rhythm of life, too effective at maintaining that sense of protection and order. It endured because it met real needs, the need to purify, the need to protect, the need to mark time's passage, the need to honor the powers that watched over thresholds and transitions. Today, modern practitioners of reconstructed Greek religion and various forms of neo-paganism still observe the Deipnon. The details have adapted to modern circumstances. Few people have crossroads shrines at their doorsteps. Fewer still have easy access to three-way crossroads where offerings can be left safely. But the spirit of the ritual persists. People clean their homes on the dark moon. They prepare offerings, even if those offerings end up in a compost bin rather than at an actual crossroads. They take time on the last night of the lunar month to honor Hecate, to mark the ending of one cycle and the beginning of another, to maintain that ancient connection with the goddess of thresholds.
Because the deepnon is not really about the specific food items or the exact location. It is about marking transitions, honoring endings, preparing for beginnings. It is about acknowledging that every month brings accumulation, that every household needs periodic cleansing, that boundaries must be maintained and honored. It is about remembering that there is a goddess who stands at every crossroads, who watches over every threshold, who guides us through every transition. And once a month, when the moon goes dark and the night is deepest, we honor her. We clean our houses. We prepare our offerings. We walk to the crossroads with our simple gifts. And we remember Hecate, the torchbearer, the key holder, the guardian of all thresholds, ancient and patient and eternal as the cycles of the moon itself. Three faces looking three ways. If you visited ancient Athens in the classical period and walked up toward the Acropolis, you might have passed a curious statue. It stood near the Temple of Nike, positioned where a road forked or where three paths met. And it showed something that would become one of the most enduring images of Hecate. Not a single figure, but three, joined back to back to back, each body facing a different direction. Three faces watching three different paths. This triple-formed or trimorphic Hecate was not how she was originally depicted. The earliest known representations of the goddess, dating from the 6th century before the Common Era, show her as a single figure. A small terracotta statue found in Athens, inscribed "Aegon dedicates this to Hecate," portrays her as a seated woman, wearing a crown, dignified and serene. She holds no torches in this early image, carries no keys. She is simply a goddess, rendered in the style of the period, identifiable only by the inscription that names her. For the first several centuries of her worship in Greece, this single-form representation seems to have been standard. Hecate was shown as one goddess, one body, one face, usually holding her twin torches, but otherwise appearing much like any other divine figure. But something changed in the 5th century before the Common Era, and that change would transform how Hecate was visualized and understood. The sculptor Alcamenes, working in Athens around 430 BCE, created what is believed to be the first triple-formed statue of Hecate. It was commissioned for her new temple in the city, and though the original has not survived, we know about it from ancient descriptions and from the many copies and variations that were made in later centuries. Alcamenes' innovation was to show Hecate as three women standing with their backs to each other, around a central pillar or column, each figure identical to the others, each holding torches, each looking down a different road. The impact of this artistic choice was profound. Suddenly, Hecate was not just a goddess who watched over crossroads, but a goddess who was the crossroads, whose very form embodied the place where three paths meet. She could look in all directions simultaneously. She could see what approached from every path. She could watch over travelers choosing any of the three roads. She became, visually, the perfect guardian of such places. The three faces were often interpreted as representing different aspects of Hecate's power, or different times, or different realms. Some said they represented past, present, and future, that Hecate could see all of time at once, that she understood not just what was, but what had been and what would be. This made her a goddess of prophecy, of knowing the consequences of choices before they were made, of understanding how the present emerged from the past and flowed into the future. Others said the three faces represented the three realms over which she had dominion: earth, sea, and sky. Each face looked toward one of these realms, each aspect of Hecate governing one domain, the three together encompassing nearly all of existence. This interpretation emphasized her universal power, her ability to intervene in any aspect of the cosmos. Others connected the three faces to the three generations of women: maiden, mother, and crone. Young Hecate, mature Hecate, aged Hecate, representing the full span of female life, all stages present simultaneously in the goddess. This reading emphasized her connection to women's mysteries, to the cycles of life that women especially embodied, to the transformations from girl to woman to elder that every female experienced. And some connected the three faces to her associations with other goddesses. Hecate was often identified or conflated with Artemis, the virgin huntress, with Selene, the moon goddess, and with Persephone, queen of the underworld. Perhaps the three faces represented these three aspects: the triple goddess encompassing virgin, celestial deity, and clonic power all at once. The truth is that the three faces could mean all of these things and more. Symbols, especially religious symbols, are rarely limited to single interpretations. The power of the triple Hecate was precisely that it could embody multiple meanings simultaneously, that it resonated on multiple levels, that it spoke to different aspects of her complex nature. The actual form these statues took varied. Some showed three full female figures, backs joined, each complete and identical. These would be quite large, substantial structures that would dominate their locations. Others showed three upper bodies emerging from a single lower body or column, a more compact form that still preserved the essential image of three faces looking three ways. Still others showed a single female body with three heads, or even three heads of different species: woman, dog, and horse, for instance, or woman, serpent, and horse, emphasizing her connection to the animal world and her transformative powers. These trimorphic statues were called Hecataea, and they became common throughout the Greek world. They were placed at crossroads, naturally, but also at city gates, at the entrances to temples and sanctuaries, at the doorways of private homes. Anywhere a boundary needed guarding, anywhere a transition occurred, you might find a Hecateion watching with its three faces. The statues served both protective and devotional functions. They marked Hecate's presence, established that a particular crossroads or threshold was under her guardianship. They reminded travelers that they were in sacred space, that choices made here had weight and consequence. They served as focal points for offerings and prayers. You could approach a Hecateion, leave your gift, speak your petition, and know that you were addressing the goddess in a place where she was particularly present and powerful.
The triple form also influenced how Hecate was depicted in other media. On pottery, in mosaics, in relief carvings, you would see her represented with three bodies or three heads, the form becoming her standard iconography. Even when artists chose to show her in single form for practical or aesthetic reasons, the idea of her triple nature persisted. Viewers understood that even when shown as one, Hecate was in some sense three, that her single form was just one manifestation of a more complex reality. This evolution from single form to triple form tells us something about how Greek understanding of Hecate changed over time. In the earlier period, she was one goddess among many, powerful but not particularly unusual in form. But as her cult developed, as her associations with crossroads and thresholds became more central to her identity, she needed a visual representation that captured this unique aspect of her nature. The triple form did that. It made visible what had always been true about her. She occupied multiple spaces simultaneously. She saw in multiple directions at once. She was a goddess of pluralities and choices and the places where different paths converged. The triple Hecate became so iconic that it influenced how other deities were sometimes portrayed. Diana, the Roman equivalent of Artemis, but also identified with Hecate, was sometimes shown in triple form. The concept of the triple goddess, so important in later occult and neo-pagan traditions, draws heavily from these ancient images of Hecate. The idea that divinity could be simultaneously one and three, that a goddess could embody multiple aspects while maintaining her essential unity. This idea, which would have profound theological implications in other contexts, was first explored visually in the trimomorphic Hecateia. Modern archaeologists have found numerous examples of these statues scattered across what was once the Greek world. In museums today, you can see Hecateia from various periods and locations, each slightly different in detail, but all embodying that same basic form. Three figures, three faces, three directions, all joined at the center. Some are damaged, missing limbs or faces, worn by centuries of exposure. But even in fragments, they retain their power. You can stand before them and still feel what ancient worshippers felt. That sense of being seen from multiple angles. That understanding that Hecate misses nothing. That awareness that she watches all paths and knows all choices. The triple form also lent itself to mystical and philosophical interpretations. Neoplatonist philosophers saw in the trimomorphic Hecate a symbol of cosmic principles,
of the soul's journey through material, psychic, and spiritual realms. Mystery cults incorporated the image into their initiation rites, using it to represent stages of transformation or levels of knowledge. The three faces became a subject of contemplation, a meditation on multiplicity and unity, on the goddess who was simultaneously one and many. And for ordinary worshippers, the triple form was simply how Hecate looked. It was her defining characteristic, as recognizable as Zeus's thunderbolt or Poseidon's trident. When you thought of Hecate, you thought of those three faces, those three bodies, that figure standing at the crossroads with 6 arms holding torches, with 3 sets of eyes watching the paths, with 3 mouths that could speak blessings or curses depending on your relationship with the goddess. So the triple-formed Hecate stands there still in stone and bronze, in imagination and art, at the crossroads both literal and metaphorical. 3 bodies joined, 3 faces watching, 3 paths extending away into the unknown. And at the center, where the 3 join, the heart of Hecate, the goddess who is 1 and 3 simultaneously, the torchbearer who illuminates all paths while standing at the point where they converge. In literature and in shadow, Hecate appears less frequently in Greek literature than some other gods, but when she does appear, she makes an impression. The ancient writers who mentioned her painted her in diverse colors, sometimes beneficent, sometimes frightening, sometimes barely comprehensible, reflecting the complexity of a goddess who operated at the edges of understanding. The earliest and most detailed literary treatment of Hecate comes from Hesiod's Theogony, that great poem about the birth and genealogy of the gods. Hesiod, writing perhaps in the 8th century before the Common Era, devoted an unusually long passage to Hecate, praising her in terms that might surprise those who know her only through her later reputation as a fearsome goddess of witchcraft. Hesiod portrayed Hecate as a goddess whom Zeus honored above all others, to whom he granted magnificent privileges. She received a share of earth, sea, and sky. She had power to grant or withhold success in virtually every human endeavor. Kings called upon her for wise counsel. Warriors invoked her for victory in battle. Athletes sought her blessing in competitions. Fishermen prayed to her for good catches. Shepherds requested protection for their flocks. Mothers called upon her during childbirth. She was, in Hesiod's account, a universal benefactress, a goddess actively engaged in helping mortals prosper and succeed. This Hecate is almost unrecognizable compared to the goddess of later literature. There is no mention of witchcraft, no association with ghosts or the underworld, no emphasis on her frightening aspects. She is simply a powerful, generous goddess who retained her authority after the Titanomachy and used that authority to benefit both gods and humans. Hesiod's praise seems genuine, not ironic or coded. He presents Hecate as worthy of honor and gratitude, as a goddess who makes life better for those who worship her. Why this positive portrayal? Some scholars have suggested that Hesiod came from a region where Hecate's cult was particularly strong, where she was the primary goddess of the local pantheon. By including such extensive praise for her in his theogony, Hesiod was promoting her cult, introducing her to a wider Greek audience, establishing her importance in the emerging standard mythology. If this is true, his effort succeeded. After Hesiod, Hecate was established as a significant figure in Greek religion, her status and powers confirmed by one of the foundational texts of Greek literature. The Homeric hymn to Demeter, composed sometime in the 7th or 6th century BCE, presents a different but still largely positive Hecate. Here, she appears in the context of Persephone's abduction, as the goddess who heard the young girl's cries and later helped Demeter search for her. The hymn portrays Hecate as compassionate, helpful, willing to use her powers to aid others in distress. When she becomes Persephone's companion in the underworld, it is presented as a blessing, as Persephone gaining a powerful ally and friend. This hymn established the connection between Hecate and the Eleusinian mysteries, those sacred rites that promised initiates hope of a better afterlife. Hecate's role as guide between the worlds, as torchbearer through darkness, as companion to Persephone, became central to these mysteries. Though the details of the rites were kept secret, we know that Hecate featured prominently in them, that initiates encountered her in some form during their ritual journey, that she represented safe passage through dangerous territory. But by the time of the Greek tragedians in the 5th century BCE, Hecate's character in literature was beginning to shift. She appears in Euripides's Medea as the goddess whom the sorceress invokes, calling upon Hecate, whom I revere above all others and have chosen as partner in my craft. Medea identifies Hecate as her patron, the divine source of her magical power. And since Medea is not exactly a positive figure, since she uses her magic for terrible purposes, including the murder of her own children, this association begins to paint Hecate in darker colors. The association with witchcraft, with magic used for harmful purposes, with the kind of sorcery that respectable Greeks viewed with suspicion and fear, this begins to dominate literary portrayals of Hecate. She appears in plays and poems as the goddess invoked for curses, for love spells, for necromancy. She is called upon by those who want to harm their enemies, to control others against their will, to speak with the dead for forbidden knowledge. This darker Hecate appears vividly in Apollonius of Rhodes's Argonautica, where she is described in frightening terms, approached by sorceress Medea with awe and fear. The goddess is portrayed as dwelling in darkness, surrounded by spirits, served by monsters. When she appears, dogs howl throughout the region, announcing her passage. She is no longer the beneficent goddess of Hesiod, but something more dangerous, more fearsome, more aligned with the forces of the night. By the Roman period, this transformation was essentially complete. Hecate had become primarily a goddess of witchcraft and dark magic. Roman poets like Horace and Ovid portrayed her as the presiding deity of witches, the one invoked in their nocturnal rites. She was associated with Thessaly, a region in northern Greece notorious in the ancient world as a center of witchcraft. Thessalian witches were said to be able to draw down the moon, to raise the dead, to cast spells that could not be broken. And they did all of this by calling upon Hecate. Why this shift in Hecate's literary reputation? Part of it was probably natural evolution. As Greek religion developed, as the Olympians became more firmly established, gods with older, more ambiguous origins like Hecate got pushed toward the margins. Her association with the night, with crossroads, with liminal spaces, made her an obvious candidate for darker associations. She was already connected to the underworld through her companionship with Persephone. It was not a large step to connect her with ghosts, with restless dead, with the kind of magic that dealt with mortality and the dead. Additionally, Greek attitudes toward magic were ambivalent. Magic could be beneficial, used for healing or protection, but it could also be dangerous, used to curse, to control, to harm. As Hecate became more firmly established as a goddess of magic, she inherited this ambivalence. She became a goddess who could be called upon for good purposes, but who was perhaps more often associated with darker arts.
Literature also reflected and reinforced class and gender biases. Magic was associated with women, particularly with women operating outside the control of male authority. Medea is a foreigner, a sorceress, a woman who refuses to accept her fate and instead uses her power to terrible effect. By making Hecate the patron of such women, literature was in some sense marginalizing the goddess, pushing her to the edges of the pantheon, just as these women existed on the edges of society. But even in these darker portrayals, Hecate retained her power. She was frightening, yes, but she was also effective. When characters called upon her, things happened. Spells worked. The dead appeared. Knowledge was granted. She remained a goddess who could be relied upon to respond to those who honored her correctly, even if what she granted was not always comfortable or safe. Hecate also appeared in magical papyri, those collections of spells and rituals preserved from late antiquity. Here she is invoked for every imaginable purpose: love spells, curse tablets, protective amulets, divination rituals, summonings of spirits. The magical papyri present a goddess of immense versatility, able to accomplish virtually anything if approached with the right words, the right offerings, the right ritual structure. She is called by many names in these texts, showing how she had been syncretized with other goddesses from other cultures, how her cult had spread and adapted. In the Chaldean oracles, mystical texts from the Roman period, Hecate underwent yet another transformation. Here she became a cosmic principle, a divine force at the highest levels of reality. She was the world soul, the animating principle that gave life to matter, the bridge between the highest divine realm and the material world. This philosophical Hecate was very different from the goddess of crossroads or the patron of witches, but she retained that core quality of being liminal, of existing between states, of facilitating transitions and connections. Through all these literary appearances, certain themes persist. Hecate is powerful. She is effective.
She operates at night and at boundaries. She can be called upon, and she responds. She is not always comfortable, not always safe, not always fully comprehensible. But she is real. She is present. She is active in the world. And whether portrayed positively or negatively, whether praised as a benefactress or feared as a goddess of dark magic, she commands attention and respect. For the modern reader encountering these ancient texts, Hecate emerges as one of the most complex figures in Greek mythology. Literature also reflected and reinforced class and gender biases. Magic was associated with women, particularly with women operating outside the control of male authority. Medea is a foreigner, a sorceress, a woman who refuses to accept her fate, and instead uses her power to terrible effect. By making Hecate the patron of such women, literature was in some sense marginalizing the goddess, pushing her to the edges of the pantheon just as these women existed on the edges of society. But even in these darker portrayals, Hecate retained her power. She was frightening, yes, but she was also effective. When characters called upon her, things happened. Spells worked. The dead appeared. Knowledge was granted. She remained a goddess who could be relied upon to respond to those who honored her correctly, even if what she granted was not always comfortable or safe. Hecate also appeared in magical papyri, those collections of spells and rituals preserved from late antiquity. Here she is invoked for every imaginable purpose: love spells, curse tablets, protective amulets, divination rituals, summonings of spirits. The magical papyri present a goddess of immense versatility, able to accomplish virtually anything if approached with the right words, the right offerings, the right ritual structure. She is called by many names in these texts, showing how she had been syncretized with other goddesses from other cultures, how her cult had spread and adapted. In the Chaldean oracles, mystical texts from the Roman period, Hecate underwent yet another transformation. Here she became a cosmic principle, a divine force at the highest levels of reality. She was the world soul, the animating principle that gave life to matter, the bridge between the highest divine realm and the material world. This philosophical Hecate was very different from the goddess of crossroads or the patron of witches, but she retained that core quality of being liminal, of existing between states, of facilitating transitions and connections. Through all these literary appearances, certain themes persist. Hecate is powerful. She is effective. She operates at night and at boundaries. She can be called upon, and she responds. She is not always comfortable, not always safe, not always fully comprehensible. But she is real. She is present. She is active in the world. And whether portrayed positively or negatively, whether praised as a benefactress or feared as a goddess of dark magic, she commands attention and respect. For the modern reader encountering these ancient texts, Hecate emerges as one of the most complex figures in Greek mythology. She cannot be reduced to a single role or aspect. She is too multifaceted, has evolved too much, appears in too many different contexts. She is the goddess of Hesiod's praise and the patron of Medea's vengeance. She is the compassionate companion of Persephone and the frightening figure invoked in curse tablets. She is the protector of households and the mistress of restless ghosts. She is the beneficent granter of blessings and the powerful wielder of dark magic. All of these are true. All of these are Hecate. She stands at the crossroads of Greek literature as she stands at every other crossroads, watching all paths, appearing differently to different observers, revealing different faces depending on who approaches and how. And in this multiplicity, in this refusal to be pinned down to a single character or nature, she remains true to her essential identity as a goddess of boundaries, thresholds, and transitions. She is what each text needs her to be, and she is always herself. Where the goddess dwelt. Hecate's worship was not uniform across the Greek world. Like many deities, she was honored in some regions more than others, her cult taking on different characteristics depending on local traditions and needs. To understand her fully, we must visit these different regions, see how various communities incorporated her into their religious lives, observe the specific ways they honored the torchbearer. In Athens, Hecate was a significant deity, worshipped both publicly and in household shrines. The Athenians placed Hecatia at crossroads throughout the city, marking these liminal spaces as sacred to the goddess. One particularly famous Hecatian stood near the temple of Nike on the Acropolis, positioned where it could watch over one of the city's most important religious sites. The sculptor Alcamenes created this triple-formed statue, and it became famous enough that copies of it were made for other locations. Athenian households commonly had shrines to Hecate at their doorways, simple altars or niches where offerings could be left. The monthly deipnon was widely practiced in Athens, with families leaving offerings at their household shrines or at nearby crossroads on the night of the dark moon. Hecate was seen as a protector of the oikos, the household, alongside Zeus, Hestia, Hermes, and Apollo. She guarded the threshold, that space between private and public, ensuring that what belonged inside stayed inside and what should stay outside could not enter. Athens was also home to important celebrations connected to Hecate.
But Athens was not Hecate's primary cult center. That distinction belonged to the city of Lagina in Caria, in southwestern Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. This region, Caria, is where many scholars believe Hecate's cult originated, before spreading to mainland Greece. In Lagina, Hecate was not one deity among many, but the primary goddess, the focus of regional worship, honored with a massive temple and regular festivals. The temple at Lagina was substantial, built in the 3rd century BCE on the site of an older sanctuary. It had a large altar, multiple buildings, and was surrounded by a sacred precinct that marked it as especially holy space. Pilgrims came from across the region to honor Hecate here, bringing offerings, seeking oracles, participating in rituals that connected them to the ancient power of the goddess. Lagina hosted an annual festival called the Hecatasia, which included processions, sacrifices, and ritual dramas.
The festival involved a symbolic key ceremony, where a large key representing Hecate's power to open and close passages was carried through the streets. This emphasized her role as key holder, as guardian of thresholds, as the one who controlled access to different states and realms. The ceremony also involved the public honoring of Hecate as a civic protector, as a goddess who guarded not just individual households, but the entire community. The Carian connection is important because it reminds us that Hecate's cult had non-Greek origins. She was adopted into the Greek pantheon, not born into it. This may explain some of her unique characteristics, her complex nature, the way she never quite fit into standard Greek divine categories. She brought with her elements from Anatolian religion, practices and associations that were foreign to Greek tradition, but which became incorporated into her worship as it spread. Moving to the west, we find evidence of Hecate's cult in Selinunte, Sicily, where the earliest known archaeological evidence of her worship has been discovered. A temple from the 6th or 5th century BCE included dedications to Hecate, showing that her cult had spread to the Western Greek colonies early in the Archaic period. In Sicily, as in other colonial contexts, Hecate may have served as a kind of cultural anchor, a connection to the mother country, a goddess who could be worshipped in familiar ways even in a new and foreign land. The island of Samothrace in the northern Aegean was another important center of Hecate's worship. Here, she was honored in connection with the Samothracian mysteries, another set of initiation rites that promised their participants special protection. These mysteries were distinct from the Eleusinian mysteries, but similarly secret, similarly focused on themes of death and salvation. Hecate appeared alongside other chthonic deities, her role emphasizing her connection to the underworld and to the safe passage of souls. In Thessaly, northern Greece, Hecate was associated with the region's reputation for witchcraft. Thessalian witches were famous throughout the ancient world, and Hecate was understood to be their patron goddess. Whether Thessaly actually had more witches than other regions, or whether this was a stereotype imposed from outside, is unclear. But the association stuck, and Thessaly became in the Greek imagination a place where Hecate's power was particularly strong, where the boundaries between worlds were particularly thin, where magic was particularly potent. Aegina, an island in the Saronic Gulf, also had significant Hecate worship. The ancient travel writer Pausanias reported that the Aeginetans honored Hecate above other gods, celebrating annual mysteries in her honor. He mentioned seeing a temple with a wooden image of the goddess created by the sculptor Myron, showing her in single form rather than the triple form that had become standard elsewhere. This suggests regional variation in how Hecate was represented and understood, with different communities maintaining their own traditions. In Argos, another important Greek city, Pausanias saw a temple of Hecate in connection with a sanctuary of the birth goddess Eileithyia, suggesting that in this region, Hecate's role in childbirth was emphasized. In Corinth, he mentioned seeing images of Hecate, and in Sparta as well. Throughout the Peloponnese, the southern Greek peninsula, Hecate had a presence. Her worship integrated into local religious practice in various ways. What is striking about this geographic spread is how ubiquitous Hecate became. From her probable origin in Caria, her cult spread across the entire Greek world and beyond, reaching Greek colonies in Italy and Sicily, establishing itself in major cities and remote islands, becoming part of both public religious life and private household practice. This widespread adoption suggests that Hecate filled a real need, that her particular combination of attributes and powers resonated with people across different regions and circumstances. The variations in her worship are also significant. In some places, she was primarily a household protector. In others, a goddess of mysteries and initiations. In others, a patron of witchcraft. In some regions, she was portrayed in triple form, in others as a single figure. Some areas emphasized her connection to the underworld, others her role at crossroads, others her power over magic. This flexibility, this ability to adapt to local needs and traditions while maintaining her essential character, is part of what made Hecate's cult so successful and enduring. And everywhere her worship appeared, certain elements remained consistent. The crossroads were hers. The night was her time. The dark moon was her sacred period. Offerings were left for her, usually at thresholds or intersections. She was invoked for protection, for guidance, for assistance with transitions. She was honored and respected, sometimes loved, sometimes feared, but always acknowledged as a power that could not be ignored.
So Hecate dwelt throughout the Greek world, from Anatolia to Italy, from Thrace to Crete. She had her major temples and her household shrines, her public festivals and her private devotions. She was worshipped by the wealthy and the poor, by men and women, by those seeking respectable blessings and those pursuing darker aims. She was everywhere and nowhere, always at the edges, always at the thresholds, always watching the crossroads, where one path became three, and where travelers had to choose their way forward. Evolution of the torchbearer. If you could travel through time and ask different generations of Greek worshippers about Hecate, you would receive very different answers. The goddess evolved dramatically over the centuries, her character and associations shifting in response to changing cultural attitudes, religious developments, and the natural process by which myths transform over time. In the earliest period, as evidenced by Hesiod's Theogony, Hecate was primarily a goddess of prosperity and blessing. She was honored for her ability to grant success in virtually any endeavor, from warfare to athletics to fishing to childbirth. She was not particularly associated with the underworld, not especially connected to magic or witchcraft, not marked as frightening or dangerous. She was simply a powerful Titan goddess who had retained her authority after the Titanomachy and used that authority to help mortals. This Hecate was probably closest to her original Anatolian form. In Caria,
Before her cult spread to Greece, she may have been primarily a goddess of nature and prosperity, associated with the moon and with protection. Her power over earth, sea, and sky would have made her a universal goddess in the region where she originated, a deity who could be invoked for any need, because her authority encompassed nearly everything. When her cult was adopted into Greek religion during the Archaic period, approximately 800 to 480 BCE, she brought these characteristics with her. But she also began to acquire new associations. Her connection to boundaries and thresholds, always part of her nature, became more prominent. Her role at crossroads was emphasized. The practice of leaving offerings for her at these liminal spaces became standardized. She began to be seen as a protector specifically of those places where one realm met another, where transitions occurred. The classical period, roughly 480 to 323 BCE, saw significant developments in Hecate's mythology and worship. This was when the Persephone myth, with Hecate's important role in it, became widely known through the Homeric hymn to Demeter. This established her as a goddess who could move between the upper world and the underworld, who served as guide and companion to Persephone. This association with the chthonic realm, with death and the world of the dead, would profoundly influence how she was perceived going forward. It was also during this period that Hecate became firmly associated with magic. The tragedians, particularly Euripides in his Medea, portrayed her as the patron goddess of sorceresses. This association was reinforced by other literary works and by the increasing prominence of magic as a category distinct from ordinary religious practice. Greeks had always had a complicated relationship with magic, seeing it as both powerful and dangerous, potentially beneficial but also threatening. As Hecate became the goddess most closely linked to magical practice, she inherited this ambivalence. By the Hellenistic period, 323 to 31 BCE, after Alexander the Great's conquests had spread Greek culture across a vast empire and brought Greek religion into contact with Egyptian, Persian, and other traditions, Hecate underwent significant syncretization. She was identified with Egyptian Isis, with Babylonian Ereshkigal, with various local goddesses of the night and magic. This expanded her cult, but also complicated her identity. She became, in some sense, a universal goddess of magic and the night, absorbing attributes from multiple cultural traditions. It was during this period that the triple form became her standard representation, replacing or supplementing the earlier single form depictions. The trimorphic Hecate, with three bodies, or three faces, watching three directions simultaneously, captured something essential about her evolved character. She was a goddess of multiplicity, of seeing all perspectives, of occupying multiple spaces and roles at once. The Roman period saw Hecate continue her transformation. The Romans called her Trivia, goddess of three ways, emphasizing her connection to crossroads. The Roman period saw Hecate continue her transformation. The Romans called her Trivia, goddess of three ways, emphasizing her connection to crossroads.
They maintained her worship, integrated her into their own religious system, and continued the association with magic that had developed in the Greek world. Roman poets like Horace, Ovid, and Virgil portrayed Hecate as a fearsome goddess of witchcraft, invoked in nocturnal rites, associated with ghosts and necromancy. This Roman Hecate was decidedly darker than Hesiod's beneficent goddess. She was still powerful, still able to grant requests, but she was now primarily approached for magic, especially for curses and love spells. She was a goddess of the night in the most literal sense, rarely mentioned in connection with daytime activities. Her temples were few, and she was worshipped primarily at crossroads and in private rituals, rather than in public festivals. But alongside this popular conception of Hecate as a witch goddess, philosophical and mystical traditions were developing alternative understandings of her. Neoplatonist philosophers like Proclus saw in Hecate a cosmic principle, the world soul, that animated the material universe. The Chaldean oracles, mystical texts that influenced late antique philosophy and early Christian Gnosticism, portrayed Hecate as a divine intermediary between the highest God and the material world, a goddess whose knowledge and power could elevate initiates toward the divine. This philosophical Hecate was far removed from the Hecate of popular cult, but both interpretations shared a common thread. Hecate occupied a middle position, a space between extremes. Whether between the living world and the underworld, between matter and spirit, between mortal and divine, between one state and another, she was consistently understood as liminal, as existing at thresholds and boundaries. With the rise of Christianity and the gradual suppression of pagan religion, Hecate's worship declined, along with that of other Greek and Roman gods. But she did not disappear entirely. Medieval and Renaissance writers, drawing on classical sources, maintained awareness of her. She appeared in works like Shakespeare's Macbeth, where she is portrayed as the leader of witches, commanding them, sharing their knowledge. This Shakespearean Hecate was thoroughly medieval in character, more aligned with Christian ideas about witchcraft and demons than with ancient Greek concepts. But she retained the name and some attributes of the ancient goddess. Hecate enjoyed a resurgence in the modern period, with the development of interest in occultism and esoteric traditions. 19th-century occultists incorporated her into their systems, seeing her as a powerful deity suitable for magical work. The revival of interest in Greek and Roman religion in the 20th century, including Wicca and other neo-pagan movements, brought Hecate back into active worship for the first time in over a millennium. Modern worshippers of Hecate often emphasize her role as a goddess of personal sovereignty and transformation. She is invoked by those going through major life changes, by those standing at metaphorical crossroads, by those seeking to understand and embrace their own power. The dark aspects of her nature are acknowledged, but often reframed. She is dark not as evil, but as mysterious, as dealing with aspects of life and self that are hidden or rejected, as guiding people through the shadows rather than abandoning them in darkness.
Contemporary Hecate worship draws on ancient sources but also adapts to modern circumstances. People practice the Deipnon, but they may leave offerings at their doorstep rather than at actual crossroads. They honor her at the dark moon, but they may do so through meditation and ritual rather than through sacrifice. They invoke her for protection and guidance, seeing her as relevant to modern life in the same way she was relevant to ancient life, because the fundamental experiences she governs, transitions, choices, boundaries, crossings, remain constant even as the specific circumstances change. Through all these transformations, from ancient Anatolia to classical Athens to imperial Rome to medieval Europe to modern neo-paganism, certain core elements of Hecate's identity have persisted. She is a goddess of thresholds. She holds the keys to passages. She bears torches through darkness. She stands at crossroads. She facilitates transitions. She is powerful, ancient, mysterious. She is not always comfortable or easy, but she is effective. She sees what is hidden. She opens what is closed. She guides those who honor her through the difficult passages of life. The evolution of Hecate is not a story of corruption or loss of original meaning. It is a story of adaptation, of a goddess whose essential nature allowed her to remain relevant across vastly different cultural contexts and historical periods. She evolved because she had to, because a deity who could not adapt would have been forgotten. But in evolving, she remained herself, the torchbearer, the keyholder, the guardian of crossroads, ancient and eternal. The legacy of the crossroads. As you lie here in the darkness, perhaps drifting now toward sleep, consider what Hecate represents and why her story has endured for more than 2.5 millennia. She is not the most famous of Greek gods. Zeus and his thunderbolts, Athena and her wisdom, Apollo and his prophecies, these capture more of the popular imagination. But Hecate, operating at the edges, walking the boundaries, holding her torches at the crossroads, has a different kind of power and relevance. She represents something fundamental about human experience. We all face crossroads, moments when we must choose between different paths, when the way forward is unclear, when multiple possibilities present themselves and we must decide which to pursue. Some of these crossroads are literal: which city to live in, which job to take, which person to commit to. Others are metaphorical: which version of ourselves to become, which values to prioritize, which wounds to heal, and which to carry.
At these crossroads, Hecate stands. She does not make our choices for us. That would violate the very nature of a crossroads, would eliminate the element of choice that defines such moments. But she provides what light she can. She illuminates the paths just enough to see a little way down each one. She offers protection to those who honor her. She guides those who seek her aid. And after we choose, she walks with us, her torches steady, her presence reassuring even when the path grows dark. Hecate also represents the necessity of acknowledging and honoring thresholds. We live in a culture that often tries to eliminate boundaries, that seeks to make everything available all the time. that pretends transitions can be instantaneous and painless. But life doesn't work that way. There are genuine thresholds: birth and death, sleep and waking, youth and age, one relationship ending and another beginning, one career path closing and another opening, one version of yourself dying and a new version being born. These transitions require recognition. They need to be marked, honored, perhaps ritualized. The ancient Greeks understood this when they left offerings for Hecate at their doorways and crossroads. They were acknowledging that thresholds are sacred spaces, that transitions deserve attention, that the in-between moments are as important as the destinations. The monthly Dieipnon was a way of regularly recognizing this, of maintaining awareness that life is full of endings and beginnings, that each lunar month brings both closure and new possibilities. Hecate also represents the value of darkness. Not darkness as evil, but darkness as necessary, as revealing, as a space where different kinds of sight become possible. She is a goddess of the night because the night is when boundaries blur, when the rational daylight world gives way to dreams and visions, when what is hidden during the day becomes visible. She holds torches not to banish darkness entirely, but to navigate through it, to find the path without eliminating the night itself. In our brightly lit world, where artificial lights can keep darkness at bay almost completely, there is something valuable in remembering that darkness has its place and purpose. It is in darkness that we rest, that we dream, that we process the experiences of the day. It is in darkness that we confront what we might avoid in daylight. Hecate, as a goddess of night and darkness, reminds us not to fear these spaces, but to honor them, to recognize their necessity, to learn to navigate them rather than always fleeing toward the light. She represents the power and danger of magic, understood not necessarily as supernatural force, but as the ability to transform reality through will and knowledge. Magic, in ancient understanding, was the art of causing change. It was about knowing how things worked and using that knowledge intentionally. Hecate, as goddess of magic, embodies the potential for transformation, the possibility that things do not have to remain as they are, that through knowledge and will and appropriate action, reality can be changed. This is both empowering and frightening. If reality can be changed, then nothing is entirely stable or safe. If transformation is possible, then we must take responsibility for the transformations we cause. Hecate's association with both beneficial and harmful magic reflects this dual nature. Magic can heal or harm, protect or curse, depending on who wields it and for what purpose. Hecate does not make those judgments. She simply enables the transformation, provides the power, teaches the methods to those who seek her instruction. Her legacy in modern occultism and neo-paganism demonstrates her continuing relevance. People who feel drawn to magic, to witchcraft, to the exploration of hidden knowledge often find in Hecate a patron and guide. She represents a spirituality that honors the dark, the liminal, the transformative. She offers an alternative to solar, masculine, daylight-oriented religious traditions.
She provides a symbol and a focus for those whose spiritual path leads them through shadows rather than spotlights. But you don't need to be a witch or a magician to appreciate Hecate. Anyone who has stood at a crossroads, literal or metaphorical, can understand what she represents. Anyone who has had to make a difficult choice, who has felt themselves between one state and another, who has needed guidance through a dark passage, can relate to the torchbearer. She is not a goddess for everyone, but she is available to anyone who honors her, who respects the thresholds she guards, who acknowledges the reality of boundaries and transitions. Her story, told through all its variations and evolutions, is ultimately a story about navigating the complex, often frightening, frequently beautiful experience of being alive. Life is full of crossroads. We face them constantly, though we don't always recognize them as such. Every ending is a crossing. Every beginning is a threshold. Every choice is a divergence of paths. And through all of these moments, through all these transitions, Hecate stands patient and ancient, holding her torches, carrying her keys, watching all directions at once.
She teaches us that we can honor the thresholds rather than rushing past them, that we can pause at crossroads and consider our options rather than choosing impulsively, that we can carry light into dark places without trying to eliminate darkness entirely, that we can embrace transformation while acknowledging its difficulty, that we can hold keys to our own doors and decide consciously what we will open and what we will keep closed. As the ancient Athenians knew, as the worshippers at Legina understood, as those who left offerings at lonely crossroads on dark moon nights recognized, Hecate is there. Not necessarily visible, not always obvious, but present. At the threshold of your home, guarding the boundary between private and public. At the crossroads where you must choose your direction. In the dark night when you cannot see the path ahead. In the moments of transition when you are no longer what you were, but not yet what you will become. She is there, holding her torches, the flames burning steady even in the wind. She is there, carrying her keys, ready to unlock the doors that must be opened. She is there, three faces watching three directions, missing nothing, seeing all paths. She is there, patient and powerful, ancient beyond the Olympians, yet somehow always relevant. Goddess of crossroads and thresholds and all the spaces in between. And now, as you drift toward sleep, crossing that threshold between waking and dreaming, passing through that daily transition that carries you from the day's concerns into the night's rest, perhaps you can imagine her torches flickering at the edge of vision, providing just enough light to make the passage safely. Perhaps you can sense her presence at the doorway between conscious and unconscious, guarding that boundary, ensuring safe passage between the states. She is Hecate, torchbearer, keyholder, guardian of crossroads, mistress of magic, companion of Persephone, the goddess who stands at every threshold and watches all paths. And her story, ancient and complex and ever evolving, continues still,
in the darkness, in the spaces between, at the crossroads where past, present, and future meet. She is there, and she is watching, and her torches burn on, illuminating the paths we walk, one choice, one crossing, one transformation at a time. If you found peace in these ancient tales, if the story of the torchbearer helped guide you toward rest, you can like and subscribe. And may your own crossroads be well lit, your transitions honored, your thresholds safely guarded. Sleep well.